I swear, the whole time watching this movie, I kept thinking about that line that Natasha says in Avengers Endgame, where she basically says that she's never had a family before until the Avengers. And then I think about this moment that they had in the trailer, and then just this movie in general. And I'm just like, Natasha, why you always lying? And welcome to my safe Gabe, and how you doing, MCU fans? We are back with the first MCU movie in really over 2 years, I think. I think the last one was Spider-Man Far From Home in 2019. Well, this movie, Black Widow, I believe releasing worldwide on July 9th. And I want to say first and foremost, thank you to Disney and Disney Plus for giving me the opportunity to see an early screener. I got to see this movie last night. So yeah, once again, thank you, Disney. Now, for the rest of you, this is going to be, of course, a non-spoiler review because the movie is not out yet. But if you could do me a favor before we get into that, if you could hit that thumbs up and like button, it'll really help with the YouTube algorithm and getting my channel and this video out there. But yeah, as most of you guys know, this movie was supposed to come out over a year ago, but you know, the world pretty much ended last year, so every movie essentially got delayed. And so now that we're finally here, we are finally at the moment that we get to see Black Widow. It's been a long time coming. There were a lot of people that were really anticipating this movie last year, but then the longer and longer we wait, I feel like the anticipation level started to dwindle, for myself included. But with all the delays that this movie unfortunately had to endure, was it worth the wait? Let's talk about it. So this movie, Black Widow, is a prequel of sorts. Spoilers for the end of Avengers Endgame. We do know that Natasha died at the end of that movie, so this movie takes place right after the events of Civil War, where Natasha Romanoff finds herself alone and forced to confront a dangerous conspiracy with ties to her past. Pursued by a force that will stop at nothing to bring her down, Romanoff must deal with her history as a spy and the broken relationships left in her wake long before she became an Avenger. And so I'm not gonna lie, like when they first announced that Black Widow was getting her own solo movie, especially after what I just mentioned happened in Avengers Endgame, I was kind of like, what's really the point? But then when I saw the first trailer drop, I was like, okay, I'm a little bit more excited to see this movie because the trailer looked pretty good. But then just the longer and longer that we just kept waiting and having to wait for this movie because of the unfortunate incident that was coronavirus, I was just like, yeah, my hype level for this movie is starting to dwindle a little bit. Especially, again, knowing what I know about Natasha Romanoff's character. Well, despite having those feelings, I feel like the general consensus, at least on the Black Gay Comic Geek channel, was this movie was hella good. This movie was better than I even thought it was going to be. This movie had no business being as good as it was. Like, as we all know from Scarlett Johansson playing the role of Black Widow, really since we first saw her in Iron Man 2, like, she shines off the page. We love her as Black Widow. That's why people have been clamoring and calling for her to have her own solo movie since Winter Soldier. And she definitely didn't disappoint in this movie. I really enjoyed the fact that we got to go more into Black Widow's origins, go more into her backstory. They talked about things like the Red Room, which is how the Black Widow formed in like the comics and things like that. And I'm not all that well versed in like the Black Widow comics mythos. So a lot of the characters that were introduced in this movie, I don't really know that much about them, like a Red Guardian or a Yelena Belova or Rick Mason, etc. So it was great getting to know and build a rapport with these characters while we saw them on screen. And speaking of that, like, I freaking love the chemistry between Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson. And funny enough, Florence Pugh was in one of my earliest movies that I reviewed on this channel called Fighting With My Family. She actually played the main role of Paige, the WWE wrestler, who's like one of the biggest female WWE wrestlers of all time. And taking a phrase from The Rock, the chemistry between the two of them was just electrifying to watch. I loved every single moment that the two of them interacted on screen. And also with that, like, I love Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova. Like, she was a very interesting character. She was funny. Like, she definitely felt like a little sister to Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. And then also with that, you have the rest of her family. Alexei, Red Guardian, played by David Harbour, which most people, you know him from Stranger Things. You have Rachel Weisz, who played Milena. And like, I really enjoyed all of these characters, and I liked the dynamic that they had with Black Widow, and I could totally see them as this found family of sorts, and it definitely worked for me. Like I mentioned the line in the beginning of this video that Natasha mentions in Avengers Endgame when she was just like, I've never had a family until Avengers, and then you get to this movie and you see she has a whole ass family. That was one of my concerns going into this movie, where I was just like, how is this gonna work? Like, how is this dynamic and relationship that we've never experienced or even heard about with regards to Black Widow, is it going to be believable? And to me, it absolutely was. And this movie had a lot of great action. Like, there was action scene after action scene after action scene, but it wasn't like a Michael Bay movie where it was just action for action's sake. And I know every single moment completely drove the story, and it was very well crafted. Like the fight scenes, car chase scenes, like it was all great to watch. And every moment was just exciting, especially with dealing with the action scenes regarding the Taskmaster. The Taskmaster was definitely a pretty formidable villain. There were definitely a lot of moments where I was just like, how are they going to survive this? Like, I don't see any way out of this. And speaking of the Taskmaster, like, I will say, like, there were things that they did with the Taskmaster and changes that they made with the Taskmaster's character that I didn't see coming. Like, I predicted that the story was going to go one way, and I was just like, oh, I know I'm right. I've seen plenty of different movies. I've seen plenty of movies. Like, this is obviously the route that they're going to go. And then they went a completely different route, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So there were things that I both liked and at the same time things that I didn't like with regards to what they did with the Taskmaster. Only because, and the only reason I didn't like it is because, like, and I'm not, again, this is a non-spoiler review, but I was just like, okay, are we going to get to see more of this character? Like, the Taskmaster is a pretty big mercenary within Marvel Comics, and I don't want to see that disappear based off of what they ended up doing. And you might think you know what I'm talking about, because, you know, it's a typical Marvel tendency of killing the villains. I will say that Taskmaster is not dead by the end of this movie, thank God. But still, what they did by the end, I was just like, what? I'm confused. And not confused in the sense that I don't know what they, like, I know what they did, but I'm just like, but is this the end of the Taskmaster? I hope not. Like, like, Taskmaster's power is basically he can mimic anybody's fighting style after seeing it done only once, and he's basically just as good as the originator. Honestly, I want to see Taskmaster go up against Spider-Man, Winter Soldier, etc., Black Panther, etc., etc. And I did see some of the, like, reviews that came out for this movie like a week or so ago, where a lot of people were saying this is like the best solo outing, one of the best solo outings within the MCU. I was just like, all right, I feel like y'all are being a little bit hyperbolic, but now that I've actually seen the movie, I can understand why people said that, and I'm kind of leaning in that direction. And part of the reason that you have that is because, like, a lot of times with, like, solo outings, it's just like the slog of getting the origin story and things like that. And while we did get some origins regarding Natasha and Black Widow and where she came from, we still know this character from all the years that she's been in the MCU, and like I said, mention Iron Man 2, Captain America Winter Soldier, Civil War, Avengers, etc. So it's not like we have to get to know this character and know this world. So, and we also have an investment with Natasha more so than we would, like, in Doctor Strange's first movie, for example. And then plus, like, yeah, this was a much better movie than, say, like a Doctor Strange or the first Thor movie or even the first Spider-Man movie. Like, I would say, like, outside of maybe Guardians of the Galaxy, this is definitely up there in terms of, like, best solo MCU outings. Oh, and Black Panther too, like, I can't forget Black Panther. Now, with that said, getting all that hype and praise about this movie out the way, I will say my biggest pushback against this movie, and I mentioned this before, and I just couldn't get it out my head the whole time watching this movie, is, okay, what's the point? Even though I'm enjoying this movie and I'm having a great time watching it, I feel like I'm kind of wasting my time because I know what happens to Natasha after the end of Avengers. Like, so in some ways, I feel like all of this is pretty much pointless. Like, all of this backstory and character building and relationships that we're getting with this new family, I'm just like, for me, I'm like, it ultimately doesn't matter because we know Natasha's dead. And I couldn't help but just thinking to myself the entire movie, I was just like, this movie should have came out 5, 6, 7 years ago. And then also a big problem of mine is, like, you can tell that, yeah, they're giving this movie to Scarlett Johansson. She's finally getting her own solo movie after fans have been calling for it for a while. But you could kind of tell that this movie is basically a springboard for Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova to basically take Natasha's place as the new Black Widow. And while, yes, Scarlett Johansson and Natasha Romanoff was prominently featured in this movie, after all, it is her movie, you can still tell that this is more like Yelena Belova's introduction to the fans of the MCU and the MCU world. And I feel like that's kind of a disservice to Scarlett Johansson because of all the work that she's put in as Black Widow, the fans that she's gained, the fact that she's been there almost since the beginning with Iron Man 2. Like, she deserves her own movie and her own spotlight. And yes, she did get that, but outside of this being a vehicle for somebody else. Like, I've always felt that after Avengers Endgame, Black Widow should have lived and she should have been the one to continue on as leader of the Avengers from this point out. And yes, this movie should have taken place after Endgame. Maybe everything that we're learning about Black Widow in this movie, yes, we could continue. It could be the exact same movie, but just let it take place after Avengers Endgame. And I feel like making this movie a sequel or a continuation as opposed to a prequel doesn't really change anything regarding this movie. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense that they had to go back. I mean, obviously besides her being dead, but like, and I don't know, maybe behind the scenes thing, maybe Scarlett Johansson doesn't want to continue as Black Widow. But part of me kind of feels like in a Thor capacity with Chris Hemsworth's continuing on as Thor, I feel like if they would have decided to keep Natasha alive and give her own solo movies rather, I feel like she probably would have stayed. And going back to what I said earlier about how much I enjoyed the relationship and the chemistry between Natasha and Yelena, just the fact that we're not really going to get that again. This is the one and done movie. And like, it kind of makes me sad because I love seeing these two together. And I feel like they deserve more screen time together. But I mean, unless they announced like another prequel that took place between, I don't freaking know, because I'm like, where would it even take place? Because right after Civil War was Avengers Infinity War in terms of like where we last saw Natasha. And I'm like, well, considering everything that happened, like, I don't see where it would make sense for them to do another prequel where they met up after this movie and had another movie or whatever. But Marvel could end up doing whatever they want, especially if this movie makes money. They could figure out a way to squeeze in another movie. But even if they do, and yeah, I'll be excited for it because I want to see more from these characters, I still will feel the same way I felt about this movie where I'm just like, what's the point? So I would say that is the only thing that's like holding me back from absolutely loving this movie. But take all that aside, I really enjoyed Black Widow. I totally want to watch it again. I would definitely probably go to watch this in the theaters. And so overall, I would say Black Widow is a pretty high hit. Like I said, the only reason I wouldn't make it a blockbuster is that, like, me feeling like, what's the point of watching this movie? And that's on Marvel for killing Black Widow and waiting all these years to finally give her her own solo movie, even though we've been calling for it since Winter Soldier. And I don't fully blame Kevin Feige for that. I know some of that, and a large part of that, is probably Ike Perlmutter's fault. He didn't even want there to be a Captain Marvel and a Black Panther movie because Kevin Feige wanted to do those movies a lot earlier. But Ike Perlmutter, who was his boss at the time, was like, absolutely not. Movies starring women and black people do not sell. So, yeah, Ike Perlmutter's trash. But the question is, are you guys anticipating seeing Black Widow? Maybe your hype level's a little bit higher after seeing this review. Once you see this movie, come back here and let me know in the comment section below what you actually thought about the movie. Also, once again, if you can, hit that thumbs up button and like this video to really help out with the channel. If this is one of your first time checking out one of my videos, please check out the other videos on my channel. And if you like what you see, please subscribe for more and hit that bell notification button so you're alerted every single time I post a new video. And tell your friends, families, and neighbors about my channel to help me continue to grow. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.